that dictates the options I have when something goes wrong with the aircraft. When the tail rotor lets go on my helicopter, I'll get about 15-20 seconds, depending on the altitude, of a very exciting ride before I reintroduce myself to Earth. In that time, if I'm not already restrained, if I'm not already having my chin strap with my helmet on, if my visor isn't down, if my bags aren't secure, if my equipment isn't secure, it's too late. I don't have time to fix the problems then. All those options, all those things now become threats simply because I didn't deal with them before the emergency happened. Does that make sense? All right, I won't belabor that point. But it's true in a lot of the things that we do, and that goes for medicine too. With the practice of medicine, the choices that we have are often dictated by the stuff we did ahead of time to give ourselves those options. All right, cool. Tell me a little bit of practice excellence. So that's a story of a guy who had a really bad day and managed to solve his problem because he practiced like this. Now I'd like to actually tell a story about a guy who had all of these qualities except for one down. His name is Robert Dodge. Anyone know the Man Gulch fire? It's super obscure. 1949? No? Okay. 1949 forest fire is on the tip of your tongue. So I think it was August 5th, 1949. This is in northern Montana, right where the Missouri River actually starts. In fact, it's going to play part of the story. There have been lightning strikes. It had been a dry season. There were a lot of little spot fires that are actually kicking off. Dodge here was a crew chief on a group of 15 smoke jumpers. So their job was to fly out in a DC-3 at the time, and they would parachute into remote areas in order to stop a forest fire when it's small before it became big. It's kind of a crazy job. They still exist. They're pretty awesome. But that's what he did. He was a crew chief for these guys, 15 of them. And by all accounts, he was a skilled tactician. He knew his equipment. He was knowledgeable about his job. He was a guy who actually took it upon himself to personally ensure that the equipment was always ready. But therein actually lied the problem. Because he was so kind of equipment focused that he didn't train with his team. His team didn't know him very well at all. They thought him all kind of reclusive and kind of weird. And because of that, that became his kind of fatal flaw that's going to play out in the course of the story. So he was down with all of these except for the teamwork part. So this is Man Gulch as it looks today. From the perspective from which this picture was actually taken was where the forest fire was that they were preparing to fight. They landed in the drop zone here at number 11. That was where they actually landed on the hill. They spent 2 hours or so working down this line until they got to this point right here. And at that point right there, that's where Dodge saw, but I should say actually heard first, the fire that wasn't supposed to actually be there. See, this is what it looks like now, but when it was actually the day of this event, that's what they were seeing. Right? It's obscured by smoke. He couldn't see 100 feet in one direction. So when he got to that point at number 5 right there, he quickly realized that the fire had jumped this valley and cut him off from his escape route. He was planning to have his back to this area here. This is where the Missouri River is. It's actually right behind there. But he got himself cut off when the embers jumped the valley and lit that part over there. So he ordered his men to turn around and start walking back up the hill. At this point right here at number 6, the fire was spreading faster than he anticipated. He realized they couldn't move fast enough anymore. That's where he ordered his men to drop their packs and their tools. They stopped being smoke jumpers. They became young men running for their lives from a fire. They got to this point right here at 7, and Dodge realized they weren't winning the race. The fire was outpacing them. But it was also at that moment that all of these components that we talked about coalesced and allowed him to have a moment of insight to come up with a solution that was going to save their lives. So Dodge took a lighter and he lit the grass on fire in front of him. And by burning the fuel, essentially, that was directly in front of him, he created this kind of zone where the larger fire with the heat would actually go around him because he destroyed the grass that was immediately in his area. Does that make sense? And he called to his men. He said, come inside this ring of fire. This is our chance. We won't make it to the ridge. And that's where the fatal flaw comes in. Because he said that, and his men said, and I quote, "To hell with that." And they kept running for the ridge line. Those letters all represent where the fire eventually overtook them each individually. 13 men died on that mountain. 2 of them escaped up through what later got renamed Rescue Notch. But 13 men fell right there on those spots because they didn't have the trust in the leader that ended up having the right answer. We don't get to pick the situation in which we have to bring all those things to bear, either to protect ourselves, depending upon our work, or our patient. That's why we have to constantly be looking to improve across all of these domains. And when we're looking at people that should be doing this work, that's the kind of stuff that we need to be thinking about. How do they fire on those different categories? So if we're going to talk about excellence, we have to talk about viewing it as a totality, as a multi-domain kind of realm. In order to improve on any given one of those sections, we have to practice with increasing precision as we move along. I'm going to use airline accident rates for half a second to kind of illustrate this point. Anybody flying a plane home? Sorry. We can make big strides in order to reduce the risk of air travel in this particular case, but the same can be true of medicine too, by using technology and engineering kind of solutions. We see that all the time. We make big strides in that respect. In the airline industry, that's true as well too. There's a giant dip from right here to right here. This is about 1969. This is the number of airline accidents. In 1969, it goes boom, all the way down here. That was the invention of the turbine engine that did that. We went from having propellers and internal combustion engines, which were less reliable, to a turbine engine, which is very reliable, and we saw a drastic reduction at that point. And we still had this kind of high background noise. The FAA in the 70s started asking questions. There was a series of very spectacular, tragic airline disasters where they had completely flyable aircraft crewed by experienced crew members, and they were drilling them into the ground and killing hundreds of people at a crack. 1977 in the Canary Islands, there was a KLM 747 that collided head-on with a Pan Am 747 on the runway because they were both on the runway when one was taking off. And then in 1979, something happened. It was United Airlines Flight 173. It was going into Portland, and it was a DC-8. They're flying along, and they go to do their landing, and they put their landing gear down, and they got a landing warning light. And it just said, one of your gears is down. So they abort the landing, come off. They're orbiting out in the distance, trying to solve their problems. And while they're solving their problems, they're pretty low on gas. They flew, I don't know where they were coming from. They flew a long way to get there. They're pretty low on gas. The flight engineer, so there's 3 on that flight deck. The flight engineer in the back is like, he tells the captain, we have 15 of fuel left. We have 15 of fuel left. The captain says, no problem, we'll be landing in 20. The pilot thought the flight engineer was talking about hundreds of pounds of fuel. He was talking about minutes. But when he said, we'll be landing in 20, the flight engineer didn't challenge him. And then, as the flight progresses and they're troubleshooting their little issue, which turned out not to be an issue at all, as the flight progressed, the flight engineer reports, we've got 10 of fuel. The pilot says, no problem, we're landing in 15. When the engines are flaming out, the pilot asks the question, why? He still never got the fact that they were running out of gas. Of that crash, only 10 people died because there's no post-crash fire. You know why? There's no gas. Yeah. But tragically, so I was researching that story for something I was writing, and I was looking for an interview. I figured it would be really interesting to see the interview with the flight engineer, but he was the only guy in the flight that died. I'm like, what are the odds of that? Yeah. But in 1979, after that crash, the NTSB for the very first time put in their accident report that the cause of the accidents, one of the causes of the accidents, was the cockpit dynamic. The lack of assertiveness on the part of junior crew members. And with that, they actually created an education program that would initially be called Cockpit Resource Management. And that's where that actually came from. It actually came out of that Oregon crash, that Portland crash, in that NTSB report. So Cockpit Resource Management came out of that. And once we started implementing that, we saw this next kind of big dip along the way. But there persists this little background noise. And that won't go away. We can't engineer it out. We can't make policy and procedures that will fix it, because those are all represented by our individual choices. Our choices to do the right thing or not do the right thing. And if you start thinking about it, we choose not to do the right thing an awful lot of the time. Our brains are designed to take shortcuts. We're always looking for an easier way to do something. How many people broke the speed limit on the way in today? How many didn't? You know what I mean? It's a shorter list. But we make those choices all the time. Let's watch this.
So it was a normal flight day. We were going out for repunch currency, landing at the ship in the evening. There was nothing crazy about it. I took off, and as I was climbing away from the deck, I put my gear up. I realized I had a gear malfunction, so I immediately pulled the power back, slowed the aircraft down so I wouldn't overspeed the landing gear. And then went just above the ship at about 2,000 feet and started talking to Pat, who is another jet pilot in the tower that controls us when we land. They're also up there if we have a problem. They have their book reader that help us walk through the situation, since we're a single piloted aircraft. For a while, I flew by the ship. I did an approach at 300 feet so he could see my landing gear, give me an idea of what was going on, and determine that my nose gear did not come back down. At this point, it's time to figure out how do I get the jet back on the deck safely with only 3 landing gear. So eventually Major Murphy came over the radio and told me that the ship had this amazing invention that was like basically a stool that was built specifically for this reason. The ship has a lighting system on what we call spot 7 that we use to land at an exact spot every time. So the difference with this landing was that I was going to step it down 50, 40, 30, 20 feet to make sure I was aligned and stabilized before Major Murphy would clear me to land at 20 feet, so that I had the best chance to actually put the nose on the stool. So I come in, and at this point I've kind of forgotten that I don't have nose gear. I'm just focused on landing. That's what I decided I had to do. So I'm at 20 feet and stabilized. I can't see the stool. I don't even know it's there. I didn't see it coming over the end of the ship. I looked for it. I remember looking for it. And thinking, oh boy, this is going to get interesting. So I never saw the stool. So I go to idle. I remember my main gear hitting, and all of a sudden my nose dropping, and it dropped more than I expected. But at that point, I was along for the ride. I don't remember feeling it bounce like it did on the video tape. I remember feeling it just got hit, and that was it. But then I had to sit there for a minute and remember how to shut the jet off and everything. It was a pretty big relief. I didn't realize how much I was shaking until I got out of the aircraft. The most interesting part, looking back at the video and watching the video, was I didn't realize that nobody was on the flight deck when I came over to land in case something went wrong. That was neat having everyone come out and congratulate me and stuff. It was a little overwhelming at first. For a moment, I just wanted to catch my breath. We pride ourselves at landing on the ship perfectly like this, in the same spot every time, and doing the same thing over and over again. But there's no way to train to land in this kind of situation.
Cool, right? So, when we start out in our respective professions, people keep us safe. And that means physically safe if we're in a pre-hospital or in the HEMS kind of environment, or clinically safe is how we manage our patients so we don't hurt people along the way. In the beginning, our whole job is about maintaining that safety, and as we slowly kind of begin to improve, we become effective. And then as we get increasingly effective, then we start building efficiency. But Captain Mahoney didn't land his plane because he was efficient at flying the plane, right? What did he do every time he landed on that spot?
Same thing.
The same thing. He practiced a degree of precision that wasn't required on the majority of his flights. But because he did that, because he practiced with that precision every time, when he had to call on it, it was available. Could he have learned that degree of precision in the half an hour before the emergency if he hadn't practiced it all the way before? Right? Getting back to the point we were making before. We set ourselves up for we give ourselves the options in the emergency by how we prepare for it along the way. By practicing precision on a regular basis, he was able to meet the needs of that emergency. We can use that analogy, we can practice precision in any of the domains that we talked about before. And the ways that we can do that is by asking ourselves questions upon the completion of something. Tony Kern is a kind of a mentor of mine, and he has a 2-minute debriefing model that I use most frequently. Basically, I ask myself 4 questions at the completion of any given call for me. I ask myself the question, were there any standards that at any point did I erode either the operational or the clinical safety? In other words, did I do anything myself that would not have maximized my options in an emergency? So was my seatbelt on? Was my attention in the right place? Did I have my visor down? If I'm in the back of an ambulance, I'll tell you what, 15 years as a medic, the first 10 of them I didn't wear a seatbelt in the back. It is not a habit to put one on in the back of an ambulance. But I ask myself at the end of it every time, did I do it? And I got to own it if I didn't. And then clinical safety side of that could be like, was my patient monitored the whole time? When I moved him over, did I rip my stuff off first and then slide him over, and then maybe there was a delay before someone else put it on? That would be an example of clinical safety. Did I cross-check something I was supposed to cross-check? Those kinds of things. So I asked myself the question, at any point, did I erode the margins of safety, either operationally or clinically? Then I asked myself, were there any standards that I should have applied that didn't, or that I didn't apply completely, as far as my standing medical orders? I asked myself the question, is there anything that I should have known in this call that I didn't? Was there a diagnosis, a medication, a condition that someone said to me, right? He had a genetic mutation in 273. Like, oh, yeah, cool, got it, no problem. Googling it later, right? Was there something that I was supposed to know that I didn't? And I make sure that next time I got that piece of information. And then finally I asked myself, is there anything that I could have done more efficiently? So, when we do that, we begin increasing the precision with which we actually act. But we always have to be ratcheting that up. And to give you an example of how that works, I'm going to use an example of adultery. Okay? And we're going to presume for a second that it's a bad thing and not a good thing. All right? So we're going to practice precision in the context of avoiding adultery. At this most basic outside level, the answer is don't get caught. That's the first level of precision. The very next level of precision is not doing it in the first place. And as I tighten that ring a little bit tighter, the next part is limiting my opportunities. It gets easier to limit those opportunities as I get older. I don't know why. All right. And then, and if I tighten that even now, I don't tolerate in myself the thoughts that would put myself in the circumstance where the possibility would exist where then I might get caught. Do you follow me? I'm tightening that ring all the way down. At the end of the last time I did this, someone joked that the final degree of precision is actually just not getting married in the first place. Maybe. Each one of those levels of precision has a different consequence if I fail. And that's the other important part to this. When we practice with increasing precision, the mistakes we make become safer mistakes. So, for example, if I fail on the very outside ring of not getting caught, I'm going to be killed. Okay? You met my wife, you would know it's true. Okay? That outside ring is a fatality. And that would be true in a safety context in an aviation or transport setting or something like that too. The outside ring means you die. The very next ring, not committing it, I expose myself to the risk of the violation. If I fail at this ring, have I necessarily been caught? No. But now I can be. You follow me? This is a safer fail. And the next one even more so. If I fail at limiting the opportunities, all I've done now is expose myself to a hazard. But I haven't actually had a violation, and I haven't died yet. All right? And then so on and so forth. Not telling you thought, that's a potential hazard. By tightening that ring with everything that we do operationally and clinically, we make safer mistakes for our patients and for ourselves. And it's about failing better. So if we're going to talk about excellence, the first thing that we were talking about is that we got to look at it across all the domains. It's about more than just the knowledge side to it. It's about self-mastery, mastery of how you interact with the team, your understanding of your equipment, all right, your skill proficiency. And then the second part of it is we have to practice with increasing precision amongst those domains so that we can get better and we can make safer mistakes. And here's the last part. That when we play games professionally that put ours and our patients' lives at risk, which is what we do, we have a responsibility to have uncompromising discipline in our procedure. When we all start out in whatever our respective businesses are here, okay, there is this kind of path as we get better, and we're guided along the way by a policy and procedures that keep us in a safe place. In the beginning, there's very little risk that you're going to stray outside of that realm because it's safe and it's comfortable, and you know that there'll be dragons out there, and if you stay in that space, people are going to protect you. But then at some point, something happens. You find yourself outside of where you usually are. And you either adapt to it or you run away from it, okay? But something happens, you do something, you're not outside of your policy procedure, you're outside your standing medical orders, however you want to phrase that, okay? I'm there and I did something. What happens next has a huge consequence. Because if nothing bad happens, do you know the two things that will dictate if you do it again? Whether you get caught, and was it easier? That's it. That's what dictates if you repeat the behavior. And if nothing is holding you accountable to it, nobody catches you, and it made the job easier, the probability is you'll repeat that behavior the next time you're in that circumstance. And now you're outside of a place. In my business, there's only two kinds of rules, all right? Is this recording? Okay, I'll say it cleanly then. There's two kinds of rules. There's red rules and brown rules, okay? There's rules that we paid for by other people's pain and suffering and demise, right? Those are the red rules. They're written in blood. And then the brown rules, which are written for people sitting behind desks that don't know what's happening out there right now. You can figure out where the brown comes from, hopefully. All right? But the problem with the brown rule is that I don't change it here. I can't change the brown rule in this situation right here because it's not always evident in the moment which one it is. Is it a red rule or is it a brown rule? In the circumstance as it's happening, I can't tell. That's not the place to fix it. I fix rules outside of the actual situation. But here I have to follow it. Okay. So there's the two things that will. If it's convenient, will I get caught? And if we start adding pressures about stuff like poor planning, like where I feel responsible for being in that spot, bad role models, ego and pride, that kind of stuff, increases the likelihood of us repeating that action. But there's an alternative to that. Oh, I should say this. That is the definition of normalization of deviance. When I do something, I didn't get caught, it made my life a little bit easier, and I'm nothing holding me accountable to it, either inside or outside. And so I'm just going to study this. Next time I'm there, maybe I'm more likely to slide back in that spot, and then that becomes normal, and that becomes comfortable. And now that's the new norm. And now it doesn't strike me as odd at all when I'm in that spot. Unlike high-performing teams, when you're dealing with right on the edges of stuff all the time, there's often a principle of drift that happens. You get so comfortable kind of heading out this edge that all of a sudden you just look over and you realize, like, holy cow, I've gotten pretty far away from where I'm supposed to be right now. Right? And sometimes it's really hard to come back. But there is a way to actually avoid that. Because if you are practicing your own precision, if you're holding yourself accountable to it, if you're asking yourself those questions at the end, did I do anything that eroded the safety of the circumstance? Did I follow my policy and procedures? Anything I should have done that I didn't, or that I didn't do that I should have? Is that the same sentence? Right? Was there anything I should have known but I didn't? And finally, was there anything I could have done more efficiently? If I'm doing that myself, I don't need somebody to catch me. I caught me. I see it. I fix it. I have a stack of note cards, right? A little 3x5 cards. Every day at the end of calls, you'll see a run number and you'll see those questions get answered. And usually diving myself out for something. Now, if I could live in the perfect world, how awesome would it be if I recognize that, I make that mistake, I catch it myself, and then I'm in a place where I can say, hey guys, look what I did. Where I can report that, and I can say it, and I can tell all of you so that you guys don't make the same mistake, or you have a way of actually solving it. I don't know very many organizations that healthy, where I can put that out there, and I'm comfortable enough to say, yeah, no, I totally did that, I shouldn't have. And they're all like, yeah, no, you're right, that's cool. All right, well, you know what I'm saying? But you can be the mechanism that catches that. That's the personal discipline component to it. And that's the piece that eliminates that last part of the curve. You have the technology piece that makes us safe, you have the policy and procedure piece that makes it safe, and it's this kind of practice that helps us modify our personal behaviors that will make us safer too. At the end of the day, that guy, the jerk, that's a brilliant clinician, all right? We're only as good as the last choice that we made. That's all we ever are. And we have to be accountable to something, even if it's ourselves. So we have to see the clinician as a whole across all the domains. We need to practice with increasing precision. We have to have procedural discipline along the way. That's how we define excellence. And when we're evaluating other people, when we're looking at people like, are you right for this kind of work? Or if I'm looking at how well I'm training somebody along the way, those are the pieces that I evaluate people against. You know, self-mastery. How calm can you stay when the pressure starts getting turned on? Right? How well can you work within the team? How well do you maintain your skill proficiency? How well do you augment your knowledge bases? I mean, that's what you look for in people. It's not the do I like them or not like them. It's those kinds of pieces that make the difference. One of the things I hear all the time on the aviation side is I'll hear this sentence. I'll hear, oh yeah, man, I love that guy. He's a great pilot. And I always ask the question, yeah, why? And no one ever has an answer. You know why? Because what they're calling is a great pilot is a guy that's got a great personality. Right? You know what I like in a pilot? Is a dude who follows every rule in the universe who's the most uninteresting guy you've ever met. That's what I want. You know? I don't need any bravado. In fact, I don't want any bravado. So, all right. Not my job. That's it. Questions, comments, accusations of fraud? Yeah.
Do you think that a lot of what you're talking about is commonly seen in the field when people talk about what you learn in the classroom is different than what is done on the streets?
Yeah.
That mentality that for some reason, not from a clinical perspective of difference, but just that things are done differently and that, you know, we don't take advantage of academics and education to take some of that guesswork out. We always fall back to what is easier and more comfortable.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. And I think it's also an indictment on how we train people as well. And probably more specifically, how we actually evaluate them. I think a lot of our education has maximized the convenience of the examiner and not what's best for the student. Yeah.
I had a question about how do you talk a lot about sort of trying to foster culture. What do you feel are ways to try to foster a culture of disclosure of these sort of events, right? We only hear about the things that actually have a consequence, but
Sure.
what are your thoughts?
I think first and foremost, it's by setting the example. You know, I think that what is usually in the way is a sense of mistrust, right? A sense of consequence. Like, if I say this to you, sure, you might not whack me with it today, but it's in the ledger and you'll get with me later, you know what I mean? And I'll hear about it, right? But we need people to actually step up and set that example. But truthfully, you have to have a leadership culture that understands that part. And that's where I think it has to be from the top down first. If they understand that, you know, I'm going to just pontificate for half a second here, but one thing that we do badly is giving people permission to make mistakes. If I'm going to ask somebody to do something, especially that's challenging, especially something that's going to have, a component where it's going to be really hard to get right all the time, we don't give them permission to be like, no, I totally get it. This is what I want you to do, and I understand, 15% of the time it's going to go wrong. We have this unrealistic expectation of perfection, and when that happens, we end up in that kind of whack-a-mole context where it's like, hey, I want you to go ahead, I want you to make this difficult choice, but don't get it wrong, right? So anyway, that's why it has to start with a top-down culture, because you have to have eliminated the whack-a-mole first. And then once you have that, once that exists, you need leadership to stand up and be the people who first point out when they make the mistake. I would start every safety meeting with, hey, this is something that I did wrong in the last month. I'm pretty sure I can find one, right? Put that out there and be the person who said it first and set that example. Yeah?
Along that line, just sort of creating a culture of mentality, we do have a system on our login page for our EPCR for event reporting. It's a national, free, anonymized thing where people can just go in and say, hey, this bad thing happened or almost happened, or bad patient outcome, or crew accident, or whatever. Those stats come back to share with people, and you see from all over the state, like, or all over the country. Oh, the stretcher almost fell out of the ambulance. So it turns out the problem, we forgot to train our people on the new ambulance, or the new stretcher. New equipment, or the equipment broke and this bad thing happened. So that starts to present an opportunity for people to think, okay, I can talk about this, but it's not in the scary realm of going to your service leader or medical director or someone like that and saying, hey, I messed this up.
Right.
And worrying about consequences, but it does start to change the culture and shares that information with other people. So
That's good. Alex, a really good way to start, yeah.
So how do you draw the line between incidents that need to be addressed, that need to have some sort of repercussion, versus those that are an acceptable incident?
Sure. So the principle you're talking about is an idea called just culture. All right, and that line right there is actually, in practice, a little bit easier than it actually sounds in theory. Because really what it comes down to is intent of the person who did it. At the heart of just culture is the idea that if what you did was an honest mistake, that we should actually treat it like a mistake as opposed to a violation. But if you willfully did it, then you treat it in the disciplinary route as opposed to the counseling route.
So the accepted it comes into play there, where...
Correct. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
So to just go back to Chip's point here, I think part of the problem here is that we train people on what to do correctly, and we don't train people on what to do when things go wrong. Like what you were saying,
That's really good.
I've never seen the Texas training for that. We don't train for it. You don't train for when things go bad, right? It's don't do that, and there's always some consequence. It's a carrot and the stick type of effect, right?
Right.
But, I think good organizations have to account for that, the thing that happens behind the curtains, and be very transparent about that and say, look, this is not a question of if it'll happen, it's a question of when it'll happen and what do we do about it, and to do things in a very consistent manner. I think that's probably one of the most disruptive things that people see is, well, if I report something and somebody else reports something, there's two different outcomes. You see that inconsistency being applied, and then you lose faith in the system as being one that holds people accountable for actions and to learn from them, instead of having some kind of punitive.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Any questions or comments? Awesome. Well, it was a pleasure. Thanks, guys.